Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 3, Episode 21, the season finale. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Well, Steve, we got a real treat for the listeners for our season finale. It's very exciting, a very special guest who made time in a busy and getting busier schedule with his new show debuting on CNN+. Tell the people who we've got as our special guest today.
We've got the Big Dawg, Scott Galloway, serial entrepreneur, author, podcast host. Yeah, I'm going to CNN coming up soon. And we've been, full disclosure here, we've been trying to get Scott on the pod pretty much since the beginning. And we finally landed him. So closing out strong, Season 3, which is also hard to believe that we are 60 plus episodes into this thing. So that's pretty exciting as well.
Right. Yeah, listen, it's been, it is, and we'll remind the listeners, we've been renewed for Season 4. So we're ready for Season 4, and we're going to kick off Season 4. We're going to take a bit of a hiatus, and we're going to kick it off in and around mid-January. And our very special guest to kick off the season with panache is the CEO of
Ulta, one of the most remarkable brands, I think, in the retail world today. So that's going to be pretty exciting. They're lighting it up and got a lot going on. So that's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, and so it's David Kimball, the CEO, and we've already kind of structured our questions and we've been back and forth. So it's really going to be good because we'll also take what are your strategies for Ulta, but also a forward look since it's our first season, beginning of January. We got a kind of a forward looking. What do you think is going to happen at retail this year? As if anybody knows. By the way, just before I jumped on camera, I made sure and do my antigen tests just so I'm good. Double. Just to make sure that everything is fine here. So, that's the new thing here as we enter. And I guess this kind of puts some kind of color commentary on at least the end of holiday and the beginning of next year, which is this new outbreak. I've lost track. Is it wave 4, wave 3, wave 5? So that's going to have some kind of impact. It already is, as we were talking off mic, and New York City on Broadway here in Canada, retail in the province of Quebec just got closed down to 50% of capacity. So what they call the circuit breakers are starting to kick in. The last week before Christmas, not so great. But awesome. there we have it. So we'll deal with that. And if all goes well, which so far in the past couple of days it hasn't, but I'm optimistic we'll still see each other at the NRF conference in January. But we're going to play that one by ear. But whatever, man. Anyway, listen, let's jump in. Looking forward to getting to our guest, but let's jump in and talk about the news. You're just back from the Middle East. So in the moments that you've been awake in odd hours, no doubt, what have you observed and what's caught your eye?
Well, probably the biggest piece of macroeconomic news, as we touch on, I guess, every month for a little while here, the U.S. Commerce Department puts out their report on retail sales. Once again, the media seems to focus on the month-over-month numbers, which I don't particularly care about. But they did report the year-over-year numbers for the month of November, and a little bit of momentum slowing. But overall, the consumer is spending. They do some category breakdowns, and most of the categories. So, for example, clothing and apparel, sporting goods, furniture, electronics, those sort of breakdowns. We maybe put the link in the show notes if people want to get more detail, but all of them are up low to mid teens year over year. A couple places where things have slowed down a bit, relatively speaking, grocery and personal care, but still up year over year. So the consumer spending, some of this people have been speculating, aside from just the stimulus impact, pent up demand, all those sort of things we've talked about a bunch, is that holiday shopping moved up earlier. So November's a bit distorted because of what might have happened in December because of fear of stockouts, that sort of thing. A couple of things.
Right in September,
So a couple of things I just going to mention quickly. There was also some reporting around Black Friday sales versus Cyber Week sales. And this kind of supports that narrative as well. Black Friday sales rose 14% year over year. Cyber Week grew by just 3%. So again, it's kind of suggestion that everything shifted a little bit earlier. I guess we really won't know until we see the December numbers. But one other thing is you mentioned with regard to some of the earnings discussions, Lowe's, the big home improvement retailer, um, essentially signaled that they were starting to see some real headwinds in terms of consumer demand, and they thought it's actually possible that next year their comp store sales would be down. So I think we've got, again, this kind of post, dead cat bounce kind of thing going on, comparing
Yeah.
to some easy numbers last year, stimulus running out, pent up demand, being concentrated into a narrow period. And I think this generally portends a pretty significant slowdown for next year. But anyway, we'll have more info in December. I don't know. Has you seen any other stats for Canada or any other markets?
Well, actually, I had a great conversation for my the Voice of Retail podcast with your friend of mine, Rob Garf from Salesforce,
Yeah, Rob. Yeah,
and we were talking about and he says hi, by the way,
he's a great
and
guy.
we were talking about and so smart, and so he's got so much data at his disposal, right? Like real time
Yes.
data. So it was a great opportunity, and he was sharing basically what you were saying, that the customer got the message, they shopped early, so it was less a reflection on the day and the event. And I was sharing with him how you've referred to it as the hypey holidays, that it's a little overblown. So we got into a bit of that discussion, but he reflected exactly what you're saying, and said the momentum continues basically from the the Salesforce data, which is so robust on both sides of the border.
Yeah.
So that's a great interview. We talked about a bunch of the interesting things. And to your point about Lowe's, as I talk to home improvement retailers here, the only question is how long can this go? I mean,
Right.
really, they've been on a growth tailwind, unbelievable, thanks to the COVID era.
Hmm.
And that can only, you can only buy so many refrigerators and so many renovations now. So I think
Right.
it's inevitable that their comps start to kind of slow down. And the only thing that could keep their comps going is if housing starts and people start moving again, because that drives a big sector of
Yeah.
their business. But
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a lot of
this,
times, at least in the US, the focus in the media on Lowe's, Home Depot, and others is really the consumer side. But they've also got a very
yeah,
big pro business. And so, whether
yeah,
it's new home construction, major remodeling, renovation projects, I mean, that's clearly, at least in the US, that's clearly been driving a lot of the business too. And there are definitely signs that
yeah.
that's starting to slow down.
I would add one more thing. The grocers, actually, on both sides of the border, I saw this from the CEO of Kroger, and Michael Medline, the CEO of Sobeys, said the same thing last week, is they are detecting a more permanent shift still with consumers shopping grocery and cooking on their own versus going out. Now, that may just be a
Right.
hangover of resistance or reluctance to go out for dinner the way we used to. I certainly think it's a reflection of less business happening over dinner, right? There's less trade shows, you don't go out as much. So
Right.
they're feeling though, as they talk to their customers, was that if 50 out of 100 would make most of their meals at home, it's now like 70 out of 100, and that they are feeling that could be a more permanent shift than a temporary shift. So that's something to keep an eye on, because that's a big tectonic movement in a
Yes.
category that's been fairly flat for a decade, right?
I
So
agree. I
that's
would have
important.
expected. I did see some U.S. stats. Maybe we'll put a link as well. That it just turns out in the U.S. that spending historically or in recent history, pre-COVID, spending at restaurants in aggregate is roughly the same as grocery store sales. But we saw this big divergence because of COVID. They're actually now almost back to that 50-50 split because the restaurant eating out has
Yeah,
improved so much. But to your point, groceries still been hanging in there at a higher level. So I don't completely understand all the puts
yeah.
and takes there. But I would have expected grocery sales to have moderated a bit more than they have. So yeah, maybe it is
Mhm.
a permanent shift. And with the variant exploding, I think at least for X number of months, who knows how long, we're not going to kind of
Yeah.
get that reversion back to the mean, even if those shifts weren't quite as permanent. Um,
And when I talk to the food service pro with my food professor podcast, Sylvain Charlebois, he tells me, listen, there's 21 meal occasions in a week. When that's how they think about it, right? And
right,
before the pandemic, the millennials were spending like 15 or 16 meal occasions out of home, if you can
right,
believe it, right? Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Where the industry has completely lost momentum, food service, is breakfast. And as you say, to your point about the new variant, well, a lot of employers are saying, okay, we're going to woe back on the come back and to work in the office. And that dramatically affects the breakfast and to some degree lunch.
And
It
some
doesn't
lunch,
really
yeah.
impact dinner.
Right.
So that I think that drag will continue as long as, in some ways permanently, people work not in the workplace, not in the office. I think that's a big, big contributor to that.
Absolutely. Totally. Yeah. Completely agree.
All right. Well, let's hold a mirror up in front of Lululemon. What would we see? Mirror, mirror on the wall.
Well, I think last quarter, the lack of mention about Mirror, their acquisition of the technology workout at home platform, was conspicuous in its absence. They did this time around talk about how they are cutting the sales estimate for the at home gym part of their business in half. So that is obviously a big,
Half.
at least conceptual
Half.
write down. So, whether that is a function of, we can sort of interpret a little bit what's going on here from some of Peloton's numbers as well, where there is a moderation in the purchasing of workout at home kind of equipment as we kind of get out of the pure depths of the COVID times. I suspect it's a mix of not seeing that kind of hyper growth in general in the workout at home, or to your earlier point, it's like, how many Pelotons are you going to buy? How many mirror systems can somebody buy? How many sofas can somebody buy? Like, there's just a limit. But I think that it also suggested that their projections were pretty rosy. So that's a big shift. Overall, Lululemon as a company is killing it. But I guess the hopes for this being a major growth driver are definitely being tempered.
Yeah, I wonder, I wonder, I love Lululemon, of course. Calvin McDonald runs a great shop. I wonder how many distractions they can handle. I think it takes everything they've got to just make sure the supply stays, with the supply chain challenges, that they keep the momentum going in the core business. And I got to think it takes their eye off the ball from an ancillary business like this. Maybe they come back to it when things moderate and they go, okay, we got this mirror thing. Let's really, we've got a big installed base now. Let's really grow it. So right. I remain optimistic about the category in general, but I think for Lululemon, they literally have bigger fish to fry than, getting people to use Mirror would be my kind of.
Well, and they've also,
in
addition to store expansion and a bunch of other things going on, they've been really emphasizing growing their men's business, which is actually doing quite well. So yeah, they've got a lot. Yep. They've got a lot going on, and for the most part, everything, despite all the challenges with supply chain and whatnot, things overall are very, very good there. So. But well, more to come on this, but it may be a bit delayed in terms of the full potential.
And Nike, they bought a bunch of letters of the alphabet. I couldn't make heads or tails of it.
Yes, a company. So it's RT. Let's see, I have to cheat. RTFKT Studios. They bought. I understand that the kids pronounce that brand Artifact. Which is actually kind of a clever name. They make digital versions of sneakers and other collectibles. I'm not exactly sure. I kind of know what that means. But this is part of the Metaverse strategy.
Yeah.
The Second Life to Second Life, as I think both of us have joked about. So Nike, it's interesting. Nike, I'm a huge fan of Nike's strategy. I love the way they experiment with things, and they continue to kind of push the envelope. And they've certainly talked quite a lot about participating in a metaverse strategy. And so this is another step. Not a particularly big company, but part of their strategy to really build out NFTs and just other kind of metaverse-ish technology and products. So one to watch. And I suspect
pretty neat. I also got to think.
I was just going to say quickly, I think I suspect particularly with the bigger brands that are well capitalized, I suspect we'll see a lot of experimentation, whether that's their own pilots or partnerships, or in this case, acquiring smaller brands, early stage technology to try to leverage and accelerate their strategy.
Oh, I was going to say, in addition to acquiring the technology or renting it, I think they're acquiring the talent, the people.
Sure.
So if you're Nike, how do we figure out this whole new metaverse, real, unreal, a big deal or not? Well, let's find 30, 40, I don't know how many people at Artifact that just live and breathe this stuff, and
Right.
inject some DNA of this metaverse into Portland
Yeah.
is also really really good strategy, right? So
Yeah, Nike's never been, or at
yeah,
least in my experience, because I've worked with them a little bit. Nike has really embraced the culture of experimentation and trying a lot of different
yeah, yeah.
things, and definitely willing to import ideas from outside the company. I think that's really part of their culture and the core of their strategy. So, yeah, I think at least at face value, it seems like a good move.
Well, all right. Well, that was a great, actually, pretty exciting news considering that we're just almost at the holidays. It's typically kind of a slower news. So this wraps up the season 3 part of our news. We'll be back in January to kind of wrap up and take a quick look at whatever happened on. At least for the first episode, we'll just see what happened over the holidays. Now, a reminder to our listeners: check out our YouTube channel, and everyone smash every subscribe button you can find, whether it's on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. And let's now get to our great interview with the one and only, the Big Dawg, Scott Galloway.